Our friends are caught. They're pinned down between a deep canyon and a mob of angry Northmen, with battle cats included. But the bears have been summoned and they've arrived, and now we're right at the beginning of what's looks like gonna be an epic battle. How will it turn out? Let's read the conclusion of Prince Martin and the Cave Bear and find out. Chapter 17, The Battle. The two forces collided and savagely fought, and such mayhem and havoc those enemies wrought. Sir Ray fought beside Martin, John fought beside Ted, and all four received wounds that were painful and bled. Still their faces were grim and their eyes were agleam. They drove all their foes back, for they fought as a team. And the king of those cave bears was hard to forget. That bear went on a rampage to settle the debt that he owed to our friends for returning his child. Swatting Northmen like flies, the king cave bear was riled. Indeed, all the cave bears were tougher than nails. They would seize those great cats by the tips of their tails. They would swing them around as the battle cat shrieked. Then they'd let those cats go and look on as they streaked through the sky till they crashed to the ground in defeat. Those cave bears proved that cats don't always land on their feet. No, those Northmen and battle cats couldn't withstand that alliance of bears and the brotherly band. They decisively lost. Some lay still and some fled, and they left the ground stained with a dark shade of red. Even Fellman lay still from a blow to his head. He was dazed and confused, but appeared to be dead. The alliance had won with their efforts combined. That's when Torben showed up, having trailed far behind. It was Torben, of course, who had felt the horn's blast. He had roused all the cave bears, but he arrived last. When she saw him, Meg went to that bear cub in haste, and with tears in their eyes, the friends warmly embraced. No one noticed that Fellman, who lay near the prince, slowly reached for his knife, though his wounds made him wince. He had come to his senses and surveyed the scene. Although injured, he was still quite cunning and mean. Fellman glared at the princess, who hugged her old friend, and he vowed then and there that her young life would end. Meg had slipped through his grasp, Fellman now understood, but if he couldn't have her, then nobody would. With a glint in his eye, he decided to hurl his sharp knife at the heart of that 9-year-old girl. But when pulling the blade from the sheath in his boot, Fellman's knife made a sound that was truly minute. The knife slid on the silver adorning the sheath. It produced a soft rasp like the scraping of teeth. No one heard such a barely perceptible sound, except Torben, whose hearing was truly profound. We perceive through our senses, you know that quite well. They are taste, touch, and sight, also hearing and smell. If you're born without one, there are 4 that remain, yet their powers will all enigmatically gain. 'Twas because of this mystery Torben's keen ear could detect what no one was able to hear. When he heard the blade's rasp, Torben screamed in alarm. Fellman knelt on the ground now and drew back his arm. When he heard Torben's cry, Martin gripped the bright blade. The boy saw in a flash that Meg needed his aid. Fellman started to throw. The prince saw what he planned. So he slashed with his sword and he struck Fellman's hand. Fellman's knife and his hand both fell to the ground. He was howling in anger, a horrible sound. A big cave bear restrained him so that he couldn't fight. To the trunk of the pine tree, Ted tied him up tight. Fellman clearly could see, to his utter chagrin, that he could not hurl a knife or a bola again. He just sneered at them all, and he was sure he was doomed. But the princess stepped forward and treated his wound. Margaret patiently bound it so it wouldn't bleed. 'Twas an act of nobility, all there agreed. He did not get off easy, though. No, not at all. After saying farewell, the bears started to haul Fellman off to their caves. They had just one for him. They could keep him confined while they slept in their den. Cave bears slept a whole decade in those ancient times. He'd be trapped for 10 years to consider his crimes. Yet the bears were humane. They had food he could eat, but it wouldn't be onions, potatoes, and meat. They would leave him dried cabbages, carrots, and kale, plus a barrel of water in place of his ale. Chapter 18, Home, Home in the West. Standing high on a parapet, early one day, were the Prince of the West and the knight named Sir Ray. They were back at the castle, returned from their quest. They stood high on that tower at Margaret's request. Far below them the sea was a sapphire blue. A mere hour before, Meg had bid them adieu. She had hugged her two friends as she told them goodbye, and she asked them to climb up that parapet high. Meg had wanted to see Cousin Martin and Ray from the deck of the ship as she sailed away. Martin never once thought of that tower's great height. Standing high off the ground hadn't filled him with fright, for he'd conquered his fear up in Northland that day on that perilous pass when he rescued Sir Ray. As her ship left the harbor, the princess had spied her two friends in that tower. She'd laughed and she cried. They had waved at each other a final farewell. Meg would miss her two friends that she knew very well. Now at last they could no more see Meg on the deck, for her ship had become just a distant black speck. And as the ship disappeared, sailing west with their friend, Ray said, "Martin, all good things must come to an end." 1 month sure went fast, Martin said with a sigh. He would miss Princess Meg, that he couldn't deny. Now, with glistening eyes, Martin said to his friend, "But we had a good time." They began to descend. As they climbed down those stairs to the ground far below, Martin thought of their quest, and his heart was aglow. He recalled how the cub saved the princess's life when his keen little ears heard the scrape of the knife. He'd assumed because Torben was blind that the bear couldn't help them at all, couldn't shoulder his share of the troubles they'd face on that perilous quest. Now he knew he'd been wrong, and that Torben was blessed with perception exceeding the rest of his kind, which he wouldn't have had if he hadn't been blind. Had that bear not cried out, the boy wouldn't have seen that Meg needed his help, that he must intervene. The boy pondered this mystery deep in his heart. Then he stopped on a stair and looked up with a start. In a whisper he said, "Could it possibly be that the bear was born blind so that others could see?" This taught Martin a lesson that's easy to spot, one the boy took to heart and he never forgot. We meet all different types as we walk on the earth, but don't be quick to pass judgment on somebody's worth. Some appear to be weak or too young or too old, but unseen may be wisdom or talent untold. Only fools judge by looks, for appearances lie. There is so often more than at first meets the eye. And perhaps in the end, we will see with clear eyes, and will know their true worth to our utter surprise. The end. Well, what a great conclusion to a great story. Prince Martin and all of his friends get home safely. They're able to rescue Meg, and the cave bear got back home. And Prince Martin shares the lesson that he learned from it all. He is quick to judge the book by its cover, so to speak, or to judge people by the outward appearances. The bear seemed weak and helpless. Meg seemed so young and inexperienced and too weak to go on this great adventure. But they both proved themselves to be very strong and very brave. You know, we should, like Prince Martin, also not be too quick to judge people by how they appear, maybe even after a first meeting. But rather, we should look at how they are on the inside. It says that's how God looks at us. He doesn't look at our outward appearance. He encourages us because he himself looks at the heart. And so I encourage you, get to know people. Get to know their hearts. That takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of patience. It takes a lot of love and forgiveness to do that too. I hope you enjoyed reading Prince Martin. I encourage you to look for other books by the author if you enjoyed this one. His name's Brandon Hale. There'll be some information in the links in the description of the video down below.